So I guess I'll present on a paper by Kuhn. Hopefully it only goes to like an hour, hour and a half. And there's no like emog here, so Remy and emog won't debate for 2 hours. So it should be fun.
We've got to put a timer on those two next time they go.
The debate?
No, on Emog and Remy.
So this paper was written like as a response to his critics criticizing his book, which is the structure of scientific revolution. So we'll just go over like a little bit of his thoughts and present an idea. So for me, like the reason why I'm studying all this is hopefully I learned something about what makes science as successful as it did. And one of the issues is like when you have two competing theories, is there a way to objectively pick a better one? Does that even make sense? It seems like it's made sense so far, like Copernicus was a better theory than Ptolemy. So the idea is by studying previous examples, if there were two competing theories, what were the characteristics, or like why did the scientists of that day pick one theory over another? And if there's some common characteristics, then we can hopefully learn from what exactly those are and apply it to current day in economic theory or whatever else, and hopefully pick the better theories that leads to more success. So that's the idea. So I think many people believe that science's success so far is because there's some objective reasons for picking one theory over another. It's not just someone's opinion or their beliefs, their ethnic, whatever, their tastes. There are some objective reasons, and scientists, by studying, they discover those reasons, and those reasons lead them to pick one theory over another. So Kuhn sort of attacks this view and says that it's not nearly as easy as it's made to seem. It's not nearly as like objective and obvious as the textbooks will tell you. So then Kuhn basically picks a few like big instances where there were two competing theories: Ptolemy versus Copernicus, oxygen versus phlogiston, and really tries to examine, well, was it really more obvious that Copernicus, his theory was better than Ptolemy? You know, not reading the textbooks, but by reading the actual like literature of those times, by the people that were debating between the two opposing fields. Basically, his conclusion is that it's not obvious. There seems to be, if you just try to use objective facts that all of those, the two competing camps agree on, it's still very hard to pick what is the better theory objectively. And so he suggested there's something more than just objective characteristics that we need to pay attention to. When we try to understand why did everyone pick Copernicus over Ptolemy, why did everyone pick Lavoisier's oxygen theory versus phlogiston, all that stuff. So then he's going to present some examples, which I'll present to you, and then maybe we can get into discussing what are the implications. Okay, so he lists some good characteristics that I think any scientist can, or anybody can sort of agree that these are good objective characteristics. So then there's accuracy. If you predict something, the theory, it should be pretty, whatever you experience should be what the theory says. If you have a theory and it just keeps predicting the wrong things, there's something, it's reasonable to assume that there's something wrong with the theory. And then consistency, it should be internally consistent, and it should be consistent with the other scientific theories of other fields to a certain extent. Scope, you should be able to predict new phenomena that other scientists can then see if you're right. And so, like in physics, it's very famous, like some physics theory predicts something else, and then 100 years later, they really discover the quirk or whatever. Simplicity, it's either we think that the universe is simple as possible, or it's just, when you're using these theories, simplicity saves time, effort. And he says research potential, which is very important among actual practicing kind of scientists, but it might be a little harder to justify. Like, when you read economic literature, the most famous and the most cited literature are the ones that open new doors that other economists can go in and start testing stuff. So it's very important in science too. So do we all agree that these are good characteristics? One of the most fundamental that you can't really argue. Is there any problems with any of these? So maybe simplicity.
I think simplicity would be probably the most problematic ones. Because I guess we have the assumption that the universe is simple, right? Which may not be the case. Or perhaps the other argument is if we have two competing theories that are equivalent in their accuracy, consistency, scope, and research potential, then we can simply swap it's you're using one to manipulate, but then we can't really say which one describes reality.
Yeah, just because a theory so far with everything you've observed agrees doesn't mean that it might not agree in the future. And why do you get the simple one? What reason do you have to believe that the universe is simple? Any others? So I think no one would really argue with this. So now he tries to apply just these criteria. Now there are many other characteristics that some scientists believe is important that others might not. And you need more characteristics to refine down your list of criteria or whatever. But at least we can agree on these. Now let's just try to use these and see, does this say this theory is better or not? He's just going to go over a couple of famous examples. But the preview is that first, so if you just take accuracy, it's much harder than you think to conclusively everybody agree that's accurate, that's not accurate. Because even he discusses in other papers where no theory ever predicts 10.6 and then it's exactly 10.6. Usually it's 10.5 or 11, and then you get into what is accurate enough, what is not, how do you determine that? There's all sorts of problems with all of these criteria when you try to apply just one of these into the two competing theories. It's very hard for the proponents of both theories to agree, yeah, you're right. My theory sucks at scope, but it's better at. But even if you agree, how do you weight those things? What's more important, accuracy or consistency? What is your basis for your weights? How do you agree on that? Because usually, with any two non-trivial theories that are both very popular, one will be better, more accurate, another will be more consistent. Well, is accuracy more important or is consistency more important? So he's sort of attacking the idea that we can ever discover an algorithm where we just decide on all these things, we plug it into the algorithm, and then it spits out this is the better theory because. So we're going to go over examples. Any thoughts? So Copernicus versus Ptolemy, the two astronomical theories. Copernicus, the sun is the center of the universe. Ptolemy, the Earth is the center of the universe. And there's some other more differences, but everybody knows about that, right? Basically. So he says Copernicus' system is more accurate in one thing, and Ptolemy's is in another area. How do you decide which area that is more important to be accurate in? Same thing with oxygen versus phlogiston. Phlogiston was the theory before oxygen that explains like why do metals burn. Basically they guessed that there was a substance called phlogiston that either left the metal when it burnt or entered the metal when it burnt. One or the other. and then oxygen can account for something, phlogiston can't account for something else. Well, which is more important? And then let's go deeper into Copernicus versus Ptolemy. So both theories, they're internally consistent, no logical errors. But geocentric theory was, during that time, around the 1500s or whatever, it was much more consistent with like Aristotelian physics, which was the physics of that time. Now we set that consistency of this theory with other theories in other areas is sort of important. But according to this, the geocentric Ptolemy theory was much more consistent with the other explanations. What led you to take over the Copernicus and basically just upset all of physics? Simplicity. So simplicity. Copernicus system, you only require one circle over every planet to determine the orbit. The Ptolemy system, you need two circles. So in that sense, it's simpler, the Copernicus. But when you're actually using these two theories to calculate the position of this star tomorrow will be this, he said, according to him, I have no idea, but according to him, neither is any easier than the other. It takes like 2 days for both. Why simplicity in just a conceptual scheme, the one circle versus two? Why is that important when what you actually do with the theories is you use them to calculate the position of the stars? I think someone would say like, well, the universe is inherently simple. Why have two circles when you can only have one? But then again, we lead to why is it simple? Why is the universe simple? Why is it not complicated? Any thoughts? So we're just going off Kuhn's examples. Kuhn himself, he says that people don't usually attack his portrayal of the examples. Like no historian of like Copernicus system says like, oh, you completely messed up your description. Usually philosophers attack Kuhn's ideas more than the examples he uses. And also Kuhn says like, these difficulties are everywhere and anywhere, for any criteria. So another thing he has problems with, so the impression you get from the scientist textbook, and he says like basically scientific education until you get to PhD, your second year PhD or whatever in physics, for example, you'll only read the textbooks. And then when you get to PhD, when you actually start doing research, you might read like Einstein or whatever. So textbooks have a huge influence on like the education of our sciences. And those textbooks are filled with examples where it describes an experiment where it provides conclusive proof that the theory is correct. Because the theory predicts this, and then here's a demonstration, it's almost exactly accurate. Let's suppose they are, and it's not really disputed. The thing he has to say about these famous examples that philosophers talk about all the time, to say like a theory is obvious because we have these examples. Well, these examples are found many, many, many years after a theory is already established. So what reason do we have to accept one theory over another when these conclusive proof or these exemplary cases of explanatory power, it comes many years after you've already accepted that the theory is basically true. So basically he's saying when there's two competing theories, at the moment when one theory replaces another, or when you make the decision which theory you go with, there's a lot of uncertainty. Maybe after you've taken the theory, and many years later, due to the genius and hard work of scientists, they come up with these experiments that kind of show like this theory is like really good. But we're not concerned about how to show or whatever. We're concerned about now there's two theories, there's uncertainties, and we don't really have conclusive proof for either. Which theory do we choose when we don't know? Like later down the road, there can be something like this. Does that make sense?
But sometimes they just don't choose the theory happening. Like for instance, for quantum entanglement, like you have Einstein's theory, and you have Bohr's theory on like why it happens. And then people didn't decide until like someone made up an experiment to show that Einstein was wrong.
Yeah, I guess it's like up to the historian to say like, is Kuhn right that there's tons of these examples where philosophers, they use examples of conclusive proof, whereas it was many years after they picked the theory. Like maybe you're right. Kuhn cherry-picked these examples where it wasn't true.
No, I think that those obviously would happen. It's just not always.
Yeah. It's just, I don't think anybody can debate because no one's in this room. Yeah, so he says, by the time these things were, like Newton's theory, there was some experiment that demonstrated Newton's theory was really good, but that was like 100 years after Newton's theory was already accepted. So why did people 100 years before that experiment, that conclusive evidence, pick Newton's theory over Descartes or Aristotle? So then Kuhn's critics, one of the counter-arguments they try to make that Kuhn mentions is that there's a distinction between context of discovery and context of justification. So context of discovery is like, Einstein thought of the relativity of light because he was traveling in the train and saw the mirror reflection, and that's what led him to think, blah, blah, blah. Like, why did a scientist, what was the source of inspiration? Things like that is context of discovery. Like, what are the actual subjective facts or subjective matters or influences that led to a particular scientist to discover something or come up with a theory, right? There's like some the structure of some chemical or something. The scientist solved that problem because he dreamed of two snakes or one snake eating each other, and then that was the shape that he, like those kind of things, is context of discovery. And then Kuhn's critics, they say, yeah, those things matter for discovery, but eventually, which theory wins over another? Those are issues just dependent mostly on context of justification, which depend on the objective things that Kuhn mentions. Yeah. And then Kuhn obviously attacks this view and says like, well, I've already gone through your list of objective characteristics, and I've shown that unless another historian is going to argue about my interpretation, I've shown that it's very hard to do that. And they really didn't have, the scientists at that time when they made a choice, they didn't have conclusive proof. They just had belief that one theory is better than another, but it wasn't because there was like the Foucault's pendulum or Cavendish's demonstration or whatever. Any questions? Yeah, these are basically just restating the things I said before. So then, Kuhn says we should study these subjective factors. You know, why did Einstein think of that? How did Einstein convince the other scientists that his theory was right and the other people were wrong? Those are not just due to objective factors. We shouldn't think of this influence of subjective factors as a limitation of science. We should think of it as one of the key reasons for science's success itself. And we have to study it if we want to understand science's success.
Does he have answers to how you go about studying subjective factors? Or, I don't know if we're going to get to this, but he says objective reasons such as accuracy and consistency are simply not enough to favor one theory over the other. Does he come up with an alternative way of deciding theories?
So I think like,
Or does he just say we can't do it, or we have to be more humble?
this book, Structure of the Scientific Revolution, is mostly like attacking that view, trying to open people's eyes. But then the alternative he basically espouses or presents is that like you accept the theory, you work out the many implications and whatever, you try to make it better. At some point, 100 years, 50 years, 1,000 years later, you get to a point where it just seems like the theory is not working anymore. There's problems that you just cannot solve.
Yep.
And then that's when people start coming up with new theories. So I think and then these new theories can solve the problems of the old theory, but they're not necessarily better in the other areas that it's already built up.
Yeah.
But maybe people get focused on the problems and just want to focus on solving those.
So he's basically just telling us to be humble in how we, view these theories and don't take them too seriously, as opposed to proposing an alternative way to decide what theory we should follow. Is that basically the gist of it?
I don't know. Like, okay, so there's a movement, sociologists, that say like, there's nothing objective in science, right? Everything is determined because of who your parents were, what country you're in, your cultural factors, your societal factors, the times you're living in, all those things. And science is not objective, it's just all completely determined. Those are like the strong sociology program. But Kuhn like completely attacked that interpretation of views.
Okay.
So
he's still saying that there is a way to come up with the best theory.
Yeah.
Okay, he's not saying that that's impossible.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's just like, it was so strongly entrenched, the view that science is objective and theory choice is so easy and obvious, that he spent most of his time just
Refuting that idea.
Yeah, showing counterexamples. And I think that in itself is a great achievement.
Yeah.
But, so the last 3 pages of this paper has something to do with like, what does he think explains science's success, and then, has anybody else read the paper besides me? Okay, yeah, I was hoping Emma would be to explain, but
It got very dense and somewhat abstract towards the end, I thought.
yeah, it's confusing. So I don't know. Yeah, I think the most logical interpretation is that it isn't objective at all, but then he strongly denied that. Is that interpretation of his view? Like, no, I'm not trying to say that science is useless or we're all lucky or whatever. Science is good. There's a reason why science is like creating knowledge and astrology is not creating knowledge. I'm not saying like physics is as good as astrology. How dare you judge astrology in a bad way? I'm saying like it's all good. It's just that previous ways of thinking about why science is good and knowledge creating is where it needs serious adjustment. And then there's another counter argument he mentions. Does anybody want to see this, or should I just skip it?
No, it's not always.
Okay.
As Beijing is a title. You have to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So, Kuhn admits, so not everybody admits there's like this great uncertainty, right? But let's admit that it is the case. Whenever people are trying to pick between 2 non-trivial theories, there's always like good reasons for both sides, basically. And they all think that those 5 characteristics, and maybe others, they all agree on those. It's just how they interpret it and how they weigh it, that might differ, and that causes different opinions.
Sorry, what causes different opinions? So if they have the same set of criteria for the choice of the theory, it just means that they would have some objective parts, but some other part would remain subjective, and they would disagree on that part.
Yeah. And I think like why they disagree is because the criteria, they're too vague when you try to apply it. So then that's like you agree on this accuracy is important, But how do you judge accuracy? Like it does, the criteria won't really say, except like general words like, oh, what you predict and what you see is close enough. And then you get into like, how do you interpret close enough? Then that's where like maybe the subjective part comes
Can
in.
you compare in terms of one is more accurate than the other, even though you can say whether it's accurate or not?
Yeah, but then there's the other problem with accuracy, like which area is more important to be accurate than the other, right? It's like some theories are more accurate than this. There's no.
I think, like, let's say engineers who use a lot of different theories, they just choose the one that is more convenient for the current problem they have, right? And so it doesn't say one theory is better than the other, it just says for this context or this problem, then this theory is better than the other. You know what I mean?
Sorry. Yeah, I agree with what Remy's saying in that it's, it could be what's the goal of coming up with this theory? What is the end goal you're trying to achieve? And that could depend which factors you focus on or you determine to be more important when deciding on which theory you want to go with, for example.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, sometimes when if you take the yield introduces a geocentric case, they may have the same prediction in terms of accuracy, just because like, it's all right, but then you can't decide which one's better. So accuracy by itself may not be like the right criteria.
Because here we're just focusing on accuracy, that's all.
Well, no, here I think the idea is that the scientists, they have agreed that there are those 5 criteria, and but even when they take the same accuracy, consistency, simplicity, fitness, and all that, they may arrive at different conclusions. One, because they may evaluate different sections differently, and number 2, because they may weigh them differently. Right? Those are like 2 main reasons.
So, what I would reply to is that like, Kuhn's mostly talking about basic science, where it's not like, we need you to build a building, build this building for me. It's like, you just put scientists, and they're just discovering laws of nature, right? You just want to find out more about the universe. And I definitely agree, like, the goal determines what you should be more accurate in. If you're building a building, you should be more accurate in building a building than a solar system. But when you're just pursuing basic science research, what determines your goal? How
Yes, truth in the, what is the essence of nature?
No, but like, you have to focus on a subset of nature, right? Which subset of nature do you want to focus on? Is there any objective criteria for which subset of nature you should focus on? No, I don't think so. If you're building a building, if someone's going to pay you to build a building, then you might think like, yeah, I have a goal, and this is objective because I'm not going to get paid if I don't build a building. But if you're just trying to discover, like, you can study trees, you can study carpets, you can study cameras, whatever, what determines your goal? Is that objective choice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's something else I wanted to say, but I can't remember. Yeah, like when chemistry, like, this is all off Kuhn, but chemistry, he says, it used to be important to describe why is something red, why does something feel like this, why does something smell. Those were important areas to be accurate in. But then after the oxygen theory, I think it was, or after like some theory changed, it was not a goal of chemistry to explain like why is this hard, why does it feel red, right? Yeah, so the goal changed. So then you can say, okay, if this is my goal, these areas are more important to be accurate in. But how do you determine what goal you choose? Why is there any objective reason to limit chemistry from studying like why is this red? Right? And then you would say like, I don't know, maybe there is objective reason. But you'd probably just say like, oh, we just like studying economics or studying color. Does that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that like, if you follow the justification, it comes back to like subjective reasons and kind of stuff. But so let's suppose that we have 2 theories, and there's 2 scientists or many scientists.
And they have the same goal?
Sorry?
They have the same goal?
No, they don't.
Yeah.
But like, they're all the same profession, but they differ subjectively. And so, because the criteria are kind of vague, it's just words like accuracy, consistency, it's up to the scientist to interpret what that means, right? So you'll get difference of opinion. And so, let's say all scientists, each scientist has a Bayesian process for evaluating the truth of it, probability of the truth of a theory, P. So T is the theory that's being examined, E is the evidence, that everybody has the same evidence. And then PI just denotes like the subjective factor. So when two scientists disagree, that's basically saying two scientists have different PI of T1 and T2. Right? They think one is more probable than the other. And that's caused by the subjectivity. Because they all have the same evidence, let's say. And then let's assume that there's only one true value of P.
How would you define true value of P?
Is it just one and zero?
Because a theory is true or not, right?
Based on the theory and evidence. There's only
So
one.
just based on the evidence?
Yeah.
So they will assume, like, are we assuming here that scientists will have different priors?
That's one way to characterize the subjectivity of it. Right.
Yeah.
But like in reality, there's only one P of T and E. Not like P absolute, but P of T and E. Like based on this evidence, everybody should think it's 70% probable. It's not like, is the theory true or not?
So are you saying that scientists may be biased and not compute the P like using standard laws of math?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one way to interpret the many historical debates over every single theory. They debate because there is one true P of T and E. Everybody should think this theory is more likely than the other because of the evidence, but they disagree because of the PI. And that may be due to different priors.
I can see problems where, like, even if there is one theory that is more probable, most of the case, let's say two theories are good to predict some outcome, right? Then you can compare them, they will have the same P because they both predict the same way the outcome, you just give different reasons behind it. Or in other fields, like microeconomics, for instance, you can get two theories and both fail to predict some of the data. But they will still be on the market used by people because there will be approximation, like the best approximation you can have, maybe. So here both P will be zero. We know they are wrong, they are falsified. Like some assumptions they are relying on, we know they are wrong. How do you choose between two theories that both P's are zero? You know what I mean?
But like here, your evidence that you have right now is only prediction, right? But
Sorry?
But here, your evidence is only prediction, so you're only evaluating it based on like accuracy. But you also have consistency, simplicity, and all the other factors, right? That you can.
I guess simple answer is just rule out those cases. Rule out those cases where they have the same P.
Oh.
But I think, like, how can you ever know that it's wrong? Someone could have fucked up with the machinery. There could be a series of
So you're
accidents.
saying it won't be zero, it will be
Yeah.
close to zero? Yeah, but then it's speculative. It's not evidence, it's just someone might have fucked up with the machine. We don't have any evidence of that, we just like speculating. Right?
Yeah. So,
Or the probabilities are subjective. The probability that the other guy whose theory I disagree with fucked up is higher in my opinion, but I don't have any proof. But you know what I mean?
so this is like beyond my experience, but I would say it kind of sounds like a lot of philosophers do kind of believe in this story, and I'm sure they have like arguments for what you're saying doesn't really apply to this.
Okay.
Maybe. Anybody else?
I'm not familiar with Bayesian
So
probability
basically,
theories. So.
yeah, it's simple. It's just like someone tells you a theory, gives you evidence for it, well, what do you think is the probability that it's true? 2%? 7%? That's it.
It's like here it's Bayesian in sense of Bayesian learning, right? Or it just
I don't know
Bayesian
enough about
because
Bayesian.
it has a probability. Because Bayesian learning would mean you have a prior, like you have previous evidence and you have something, and as soon as you discover new evidence, you will update your probabilities and get new probabilities. The thing is that most of the time you start with a prior that doesn't rely on evidence, it's just the probability of the theory in your opinion, right? And then, well, you will have different way to approach this. You can say, oh, my prior is that both theory have the same probabilities, and then I put evidence on it and I see how it changes if one takes the lead over the other. But you can always argue over the prior. The prior is subjective anyway, right?
You can. Yeah, I'm just gonna skip that because I'm talking way beyond my competence.
Okay.
Someone in the video can, if they're watching, put it in the comments. Remy, here's the reply to your.
So there'll be like massive comments on YouTube.
Yeah. And then, let's say there's debate. Basically, they don't agree. And then, like, the first time you show that evidence, they don't agree. But then if you increase E, and that's kind of what you're talking about.
It should converge.
Yeah. The argument against Kuhn is that if there was perfect knowledge, everybody would pick the same one. But because they don't have perfect knowledge, there's these disagreements.
If we have perfect knowledge, we should have P of T being either 0 or 1.
Yeah. And then, as evidence increases, there's lesser disagreements. So that we do, I guess, kind of see that in a way. Like, we're not still debating like Copernicus versus whatever. Like, Copernicus won, and then Newton won, and then Einstein won. So, but then Kuhn just basically says, how do you know that? Like, do you have any other evidence besides the appearance that they're like? We see that opinions are converging. Is that because the subjective factors are getting erased out as more evidence accumulates and the probabilities converge? Or is it just because of the social aspect where people, like, you won't get a job unless you do Einstein.
Yeah.
You won't get a job at Harvard unless you do neoclassical theory, like, or anything else.
I think another very big factor is technology or methods. Even if you read Pareto or like some of the big economists, they will put massive doubts on what they write. They'll say, okay, agents are rational. Themselves they will say, I think they are emotional factors and other stuff. Which is that with these assumptions and this theory, we know how to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And we can like later get your markets and how price, like supply and demand determines price and quantities and stuff like this. And it's only very later when we start having more insight on behavior and all those simulation techniques with computers and stuff like this, that we'll be able to use another theory, saying people are not rational, and solve the problem using this other theory. And the only thing making this other theory not adopted before is that we didn't have the skills to solve the problem.
Okay, that's like another objective view, right? It's not like a subjective. Because Einstein was charismatic, he won.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this.
You know what's really interesting about this is that you have fields like formal science, like maths and logic, where people actually don't have any evidence to work with, but they still have debates and arguments, and then one side wins. And I think in that case, there's a parallel between the two situations, right? And I'm starting to see like a more subtle connection. Do you know what I mean? Like for instance, some people didn't like set theory when it was first introduced.
What?
Some people didn't like set theory when it was first introduced.
Right.
And then it had to go over like around 50 years of debate before it was actually like the norm. I mean, obviously not. There's nothing wrong with set theory, but there's no like evidence that you can collect over set theory as to whether these two right or wrong, right? Because of mathematics.
But set theory is just a tool, not really a theory in the scientific sense.
But some people said that it was style wrong. Some people believe that like you couldn't use it. Like,
Because,
it was like some religious beliefs also, but like also like Poincaré, he as a mathematician, he believed in like mathematical intuition.
Yeah.
He didn't believe in formalizing stuff as much as like the logical mathematicians. So they had a huge debate.
Okay.
In the end, he lost out, but like.
Because in math, you define the concept. Like I define addition to be this. Then it's not wrong. I created the concept.
Yeah.
Like,
but like Poincaré didn't like this definition. Like he wanted to have the intuitive like idea of say addition or limits. He didn't want to define it. But I guess in that sense the choice was made just because mathematicians in general like to define stuff more than they like to use intuition. But in that sense it's purely subjective, right? So,
Are you saying like in mathematics there's no like empirical evidence? So why is there unanimity? Why does everybody study set theory nowadays? Is that what you're saying? Why isn't there like competing schools? Why did one side win? When it's like
I guess that's like the question, right?
do we define math as a science?
Sorry?
Math? Would we define math as a science?
Yeah, it's defined as a formal science.
But isn't in math it should be easy to just be like to prove whether a theory is just consistent? It's all just like,
You actually can't ever prove a series of system. If you have a formal system, and if it's strong enough to express numbers and recursiveness, then it's either incomplete or inconsistent. But you never want it to be inconsistent, so it all depends on your proof. But the theory also says that you can never prove that it's like not inconsistent. But you just usually go with it.
So how did they choose that theory then?
I think it was just at that time we had Gilbert and Bertrand Russell. They were like working on set theory a lot, and it had a lot of really, really nice interpretations with other areas in math. And it was so useful that people started using it. And you see this all the time, right? Like currently, in the last 50 years or so, something called category theory has popped out. And people have been using category theory from before, but it was just very vague and very like crazy that they didn't want to use it. But as people study category theory more and more, they realized that they had some really, really nice ways of re-expressing other things in math, and it just works out. And so people have been studying this a lot lately. But
So isn't that kind of similar to evidence? Like it's a useful theory. It's like empirical evidence. It's a theory that's useful for explaining natural phenomena versus a mathematical theory that's useful for solving.
I guess that's like a good way of thinking.
yeah, I agree with you. I think an interesting question is like, so Kuhn claims that in science there's unanimity eventually. When the two theories come out, at first there's debate. There's a very acrimonious debate that's not conveyed in the textbooks. But after a while, there is a victor that completely destroys a lot of the theories. So his example is like, no one uses Aristotelian physics anymore. No one uses the phlogiston theory. So he claims that this is a unique characteristic to science. Whereas in like philosophy, there's many schools, and no one will ever like completely destroy the other. In literature, in art, whatever. Sorry.
Economics.
Yeah. Well, even in academics, neoclassical is pretty dominant so far. Isn't it?
Yeah, but
Pretty dominant.
But it's not unanimously accepted.
Yeah. So, I guess like one of the questions that Kuhn poses and never fully answers is, why is there such unanimity? Like, is it because of this objective story where all the probabilities are converging, or is it just like some other reason?
Well, if you don't agree with the theory, you don't get published.
Yeah, maybe, or you don't get funding, or I don't know. It could be those reasons, not whatever.
just get taught, like, you know, like a few generations down, like you don't ever hear about something like this. They're
Just in
drowned
this
out.
story of thought.
Yeah.
They feel that in economics in particular, the field just grew to include stuff that would not be considered as neoclassical.
What?
Like, at the beginning we had this dominant school where people will have utility and they will work with marginal utility and blah, 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 blah. And then you're like, oh, extend it and include expected utility. And then you'll like extend it and include non-rational objects. And which needs so many ways that it started to include all the stuff that would be considered as outside before. And not just part of the big neoclassical economics. It's just that over time neoclassical economics would not always be the same. You know what I mean?
I think so. But like, how does that relate to? So you're saying economics is a science or not?
No, it's, well, I hope it's a science. Depends on the definition of science. I thought math was not a science. So it just, you say neoclassical is a dominant paradigm in economics. I feel that competing paradigms have been included in neoclassical, and it's not like they disappear because people started to accept more neoclassical. It's just that neoclassical evolved to include everything. The current neoclassical will falsify the previous neoclassical. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I read some other papers and like one of Kuhn's students that kind of disputes this picture as like Newton completely destroying Descartes, Einstein completely destroying Newton, because Newton's theories are still, I heard that they're still used to predict stuff because they're good enough. And like, no one thinks Newton's a fraud. I mean, he's hailed as a genius. Everybody knows about the apple hitting his head. So it's the picture that Kuhn conveys, the historical picture. There's some dispute about it. Although most philosophers, they're not trained in philosophy, history, so they're not gonna like say like, oh, actually the proponents of phlogiston theory, they blah blah blah. So your picture of that time period, they don't do that, right? But maybe there should be. There is some debate about the picture he presents, some historical debate. And like what Rebbe said, I think like neoclassical didn't totally just destroy those ideas; they got incorporated. Maybe that happens way more in science, where the victor didn't just completely like push over the loser to the side. Like some of the losers' insights and stuff are submerged, and then they just become one gigantic bluff. Okay. Oops, misspelled. Maximus is only So here's how Kuhn says science kind of works. Basically, like until now he's been pretty much just counter-exampling the previous tradition or whatever. But now he says like here's what I think is going on. So basically, you can take the same criteria, accuracy, consistency, and whatever, but it's not. You shouldn't think of them as like an algorithm where it tells you exactly what it is. What does this decision should be? You shouldn't look for that. It's not possible. Instead, you should think of them sort of as like values, or I guess like a compass that points you in the direction, but everybody can agree, disagree about like which way to exactly go. So he, first of all, he just comes up with, he talks about normal life where, you know, there's like these competing or conflicting maxims, right? He who hesitates is lost, and then that says like, do it now. And then look before you leap. Well, hold on a minute. These are two completely different conflicting messages, right? But no one says these things are useless. You hear that all the time. Other stuff like values, freedom of speech versus preservation of life and property. So like, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because there'll be stampede and people will die. But that's against your preservation, freedom of speech. But we still, no one will say these two things because they're conflicting. They're useless. So that's the idea that he has about those criteria. They conflict with each other all the time, but still they're not useless because they aim to guide life. So instead of thinking them as like absolutely, they tell you exactly what to do, you think of them as things that kind of guide and influence your action in an exact way, with subjective factors influencing exactly how you do it. So it can explain why there's lack of unanimity. And he says that they do sort of play a useful function, because even if people don't agree how accurate a theory is, or which one's more accurate, you talk about accuracy, right? Right? It focuses the debate into that area where you start thinking about, oh, my theory's prediction is important in some way. I don't necessarily agree with my critic, which area is most important, or if this is important or not, but it focuses scientists' efforts into that area where like it needs to be accurate. Now there's problems like exactly agreeing or thinking about it as a rule, because it's too vague. What does accurate exactly mean? When you try to apply that criteria to your work, you need to make some subjective input into it, but still it focuses the discussion. So when Copernicus and the other person were debating, they debated about prediction and accuracy. They just talked beyond each other. They're like, no, that's not important, that is important, blah, blah, blah. And then this is sort of like a Darwinian analogy. Like, it's actually useful to have diversity of theories and have theories popping up, selection and mutation, and survival of the fittest. He doesn't say those things, but it's kind of obvious that that's what he's referring to. If there was an algorithm that told each scientist exactly what to do, and the same thing, then nobody would come up with an alternative theory, and then we'll never find out if that's actually good. Is that?
Why would they not want to do that? Why would they not want to come up with a new theory? Can they try and match the algorithm better with a new theory?
Well, sorry?
Couldn't they try and come up with a new theory that works within the algorithm to a better extent than the prior theory?
I guess Kuhn's imagining like a scenario where an algorithm tells scientists exactly what to do, but we are never
I thought the
sure.
algorithm was determining, you place a bunch of competing theories into this algorithm and it spits out the best one based on a list of a bunch of factors.
Yeah,
Well, that's
so
what he meant.
this argument is not the best, but yeah, I agree. Like, you take this argument seriously, like its sentence about algorithms are bad because they tell every scientist what to do. Like, an algorithm doesn't have to tell everybody what to do. Like, it can tell 10 scientists to work on this, 5 scientists to work on this. Why is that a problem? Right? But the idea is that if you search for an algorithm, then maybe it will lead everybody to do the same thing, and that's bad. Diversity, some amount of diversity is good, basically. But you can, critics will argue like, well, you can just incorporate diversity into your algorithm, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what determines the...
Yeah, so, but that's the idea. And then the question is, okay, so how do we know which values are good? Because we started off this whole question with, we want to examine previous cases of theories being picked, and we were hoping that we find some common characteristics for their success. Now we said that we can't have rules, but we can have values. The question is, which values? And how do we know that they're good? And then Kuhn just says that this is a question about induction. Why has scientists, just because we've been using science and it's been good so far, how do we know that it's going to be good in the future? That's basically what he says. And then if you can like argue, criticize this, right? Like, we couldn't agree about which rules are the best. Do you think we can agree which values are the best? Don't you think there'll be argument about which values are good, which values are bad? And then this is like at the end of 2 pages. I can actually just end it now if you are pressed for time. It's not.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so basically it's just thoughts on subjectivity. And there's like two different elements to subjectivity. There's your taste, which can't be disputed, your preferences or whatever. But then there's also your judgment, which can be talked about. And I actually don't understand this very well. But I think what Kuhn is trying to say is that choice on theories is like a judgment. So why philosophers don't like what Kuhn's saying, it kind of sounds like Kuhn's saying there's no objective reasons, people just do whatever the hell they want, scientists, they just pick that theory because they liked it for whatever reason, psychology, whatever, and we've been pretty much basically lucky so far. That's not the best implication, because then no one can ever argue about anything, it's just, you just do whatever you want. I guess most people would have a hard time believing that's the reason for our success. That's the reason behind building the atom bomb and everything. But Kuhn says that just because it's subjective doesn't mean you can't talk about it, because scientific theory is about judgments. Like say, I thought that film was a pot boiler, which I think means it's a good film.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. What does that mean?
I thought it was a bad film, but I think it's a good film. So you can't dispute that my taste for the film, it's subjective. There's no way to say it's objectively wrong that you like certain kinds of film. But you can still talk about the judgment that it was a pot boiler of a film. And he says like you can, when you're arguing about a good film, I guess, why it's a good film, you'll list other films that you liked. It will reveal something about your taste. But then the judgment that it was a good film, you can still talk about it. So the thing I wanted to ask Emma was, well, still, doesn't that, there's no like objective answer there then. There's no good film, like, right? It's not right or wrong, it's just it's ultimately based on your preferences anyway. So like, why do you even make the distinction? If you take this analogy to science, and I say, I think this is a good theory, you can talk about it, you can list other theories that you think is good, but ultimately that only reveals your preferences and tastes. It doesn't say anything about the objective reasons or this is the correct answer, this is a good theory, start studying. So it still sounds like even if you make the distinction, if you take the view that everything's subjective, theory choice is subjective, there's no good objective reasons, then you ultimately can't talk about it. Just whatever you like. And it's probably more subtle than that. It's probably like to do with institution and funding and psychology, herd mentality, mob psychology, whatever. But ultimately, you can't talk about it. It's kind of, I think it's hard for you guys to like say anything because like you didn't read the 2 pages.
He dismissed completely the criteria we had in the beginning.
No, he doesn't.
They are still objective. So that would be on the part where there is no clear dominance of a theory over another, right? But we can still have a dominance. Like, oh, the theory predicts this, obviously it's false, we experimented on it. Like, we dismiss the theory. We can't keep the theory just because of taste. You know what I mean?
See, I don't think he would like that interpretation of it. It's very tricky.
Yeah.
There are people that interpret it that way, the sociologists, group of sociologists, but he hates them.
Okay.
So
it's a matter of his taste.
So I guess this is beyond my competence, but maybe he says like those areas where debate is focused into, they're productive. We should try to find out why talking about accuracy, even if neither is necessarily right, why that leads to production of knowledge.
I think that for science it's rather easier because like, I mean, it's rather hard to have a diverse collection of theories, or like it's easier for theories to be replaced and renewed, because I feel like science or any subject that's like just science, they are really they exclude human from it. Like they want to focus on like this is how nature works, or like this is how like the world works, even if human doesn't interfere anything. Well, say if you're like saying about economics or arts or any other subject, as long as there's human involved, you cannot like just have one theory or one ideology dominated, because there will be different tastes, there will be different preferences of people, and there will be different kind of ways people do stuff. But for science, they can say, oh, it's not about taste because like if the nature is like this, there's no taste. It's not like a film, it's more like we just have our own judgment about whether it is accurate or not. So I feel like it might be actually like a lot more objective, but I mean like at the end, who makes the decision is still subjective.
Yeah.
But I guess like it's pretty different. Consider if your subject has human involved or not.
I would say that it's not a difference of kind, it's a difference of degree. And that's even disputable because when you read the statements that scientists make, they study just like totally abstract things, right? Chemistry or whatever. They talk about it like in really highly aesthetic ways. You know, like the first time I decided to study microbiology, I got a wonderful sense of the order of the universe. And so I think, at first glance, it might look like, why would you have an aesthetic over like how the table works or how the camera works? But for the practicing scientist, I think there might be like strong taste on like how you think about the universe.
Like it is just a way for them to think what's like the most efficient way they have figured out so far to explain stuff. Instead of like this is just my taste, like how I like it.
There are like, so I would just give you some examples.
Yeah.
Maybe Einstein hated Bohr's quantum mechanics, right? He hated the thought that the universe was stochastic. And I'm sure like each of you have a strong opinion on that. Like if you think about it, do you think God plays dice or not? It's kind of, it's sort of like an abstract thing, like why do you care? Let's just look for the most efficient explanation. But once you start like really thinking about it, I think you might get into like, you might if you care. Yeah, so maybe you're right, like not as many people care about like what kind of government as opposed to what kind of universe. But the people that do care, they still care like a whole bunch. Like Einstein he basically said, I don't like Bohr's theory, and that's it. I hate the stochastic. And that's actually mentioned in this article, like Einstein just said he hated it, Bohr, he would give reasons for why his theory is good, Bohr won. So, yeah, I think it's a difference of degree, not kind.
So, I read the passage. From what I can understand, from what I'm not much about it, the idea here is just to like recall. I think the idea here is that your taste is completely subjective, but the judgment of your taste might be objectively talked about in that sense. And then he goes on to lead this knowledge of theory of choice, theory of choice. He says, conceivably, my discussion of theory of choice indicates some limitations of objectivity, but not by isolating elements properly called subjective. So the idea here is that he says, yeah, we have limitation on objectivity of the 5 factors, but just having those limitations, just as we have limitations when we talk about our judgments, does not mean then that those 5, how scientists judge accuracy, consistency becomes subjective. And so he's just saying, I think the idea is that some critics criticized him on his view of science being subjective, and he said, yes, I call it subjective, but what I really mean is that there's a limitation on objectivity, just as in this case. So that's what I got from just reading the passage, but I'm not really sure.
This is just an aside, but I'm just curious as to how, if you know what contemporary philosophers of science think of Kuhn's ideas in regards to theory.
That's what I wanted to figure out too, because I read a lot of Kuhn lately.
Yeah.
It kind of. Okay, so where's that going? That's my question. But I think it's like they appreciate the importance, but it's very hard to construct any theory based off of this because everything is going to shift. Like, how do you define a value? How do you use that? If someone says that's not a value, this is a value, it's very hard to argue that this is a value when it's like it's very hard to. These concepts are so like not highly delineated that it's just like kind of just very hard to use, I think.
Yeah. It's like the question I had at the beginning, asking, what's his alternative? It's not leaving any space for an alternative. Really, it's just saying that we have these limitations that we really need to at least acknowledge when we're pursuing scientific research.
So, yeah, I think that's it. It's just like philosophers, they'll just say like, oh yeah, it's because of Kuhn that we have to read actual science texts now. I hate that guy. I think that's it. Like his influence is, you need to study more about history. There may be some serious misconceptions. Is that true? Is that not? Let's figure it out.
So they seem to take his ideas somewhat seriously.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay.
I just read like his big concept is paradigm. So it's like the idea that it's a collection of beliefs and theories that scientists hold, and they use that to come up with many implications and get better at predicting stuff. But eventually, you run into a puzzle, and then it'll be replaced by a new paradigm that has a new approach and then you'll get some implications, and then you'll run into problems, and then there'll be another revolution. So like the example of paradigm change is like from Ptolemy to Copernicus, except like there's a philosopher that notes like 22 different uses of the word paradigm in his book. It's very precise. And
I was going to say there's different types of paradigm changes out there.
These concepts are so hard to use that even though he's kind of famous, the message is acknowledged as maybe important. There's nothing built off this, I think.
But so he said that we should study the subjective factors, right? That can determine which theory wins. But has no one done that since then? Tried.
I have no idea.
Just tried. I mean, should it be,
You mean identify subjective factors and
Yeah.
rank them or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, you can see like why, how, like you can study the debates, like the big debates, and see how did they convince each other.
There are like some parts that sort of do that, I guess. Like I mentioned like a couple of times before the strong sociology program that basically says all the science is based can be traced back to your cultural stuff.
Right.
So like well, last week when we were discussing Adam Smith and Ricardo and stuff, we were saying it's the product of their time that their theories came about. So,
Yeah.
We do it in economics, it seems to me.
Yeah. Did you guys discuss how the dominant economic theories came to dominate?
Yeah. Well, just in relation to Adam Smith.
Okay.
So.
Anyways, that's
Okay, that's it. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. So, what's to present?
I don't know. I wouldn't mind learning